So usually when a game studio rakes in the big bucks off a new IP, the natural reaction from the studio is,
another one.
Might as well reuse all the assets and build upon what works, right? At least not for Supergiant Games. They said fuck all that shit, we're gonna create some entirely new shit with the same people because we're just that talented.
And yeah, the only thing that Transistor has in common with Bastion is that they're both isometric. Aside from that, these games couldn't be any more different. It's actually to the point where I don't know if I could recommend this game to those that really enjoyed Bastion, but we'll get into more details about that later in the video, especially when we talk about the gameplay.
Hey, up there. Hello, world. Look at all that. We're on the edge of town. 100 blocks away.
So you got a pretty redhead and a giant talking sword that looks like a goddamn computer chip. For those that haven't played this, you're probably wondering what the hell this game's about. Well, you play as Red, a former famous singer in the cybernetic city known as Cloudbank. The game opens with her mourning the death of an unknown man who's been stabbed by a giant sword known as the Transistor. Upon pulling the transistor from the man's corpse, it's apparent that the man's consciousness, along with Red's voice, has been absorbed inside it. They're confronted by a robot army known as the Process, where it's suspected that the man's death was caused by a group of people behind this army known as the Camerata. For the rest of the game, Red and the Transistor battle these robots while slowly uncovering the whereabouts of the Camerata, how the man died, and why Cloudbank is going to shit. If the summary of the game's plot sounds really vague, that's because the way this game tells its story is pretty unorthodox, and there's no way I can talk about what really goes on in this game without spoilers, so we'll get back to all this later. I'll tell you one thing, there definitely hasn't been a drop off in terms of art style. This game looks fucking gorgeous, man. Everything looks so slick and jazzy. Same artist from Bastion, Gen Z. That woman can draw, yo. Almost everywhere you walk in this game is a pretty overhead snapshot. Similar hand-painted art style from the former game Bastion, but with a much darker color palette. There's also more realistically proportioned characters, which match the more grim, dark cyberpunk aesthetic of the game. Cloudbank is definitely an interesting, foreboding looking city on the surface, but I would be lying if I said I didn't get numb to how it looked after a while. Of course, it wouldn't make sense to have a bunch of different locations in the game since the entire narrative takes place here, but some distinction between the different districts Red travels through would have been nice. Also, I'm not too impressed with the enemy designs here. I mean, is it just me or do the Process look like generic evil robots that you could find in any other cyberpunk fiction? In fact, a lot of them just look like more evil versions of those robots from Portal. Anyway, these latter points are mostly just nitpicks. The overall look of the game is pretty stellar. The best part is that the PC requirements are incredibly minimal. You can easily run this on a standard laptop. So you're probably looking at this and wondering, what even is this gameplay? An action game, a tactical RPG, a turn-based tactics game? And the answer to that is yes. Think Bastion with less real-time mechanics, seasoned with some XCOM and Baldur's Gate. Sounds really weird, right? Well, it feels as awkward to play as it sounds. So how it works is that battles are generally real time with these turns that you have to wait for in order to access the planning mode. While you're in planning mode, you got this action bar at the top where you schedule a limited amount of moves that Red can execute in rapid succession. Once these attacks get executed, it's back to the real time where you gotta wait for your turn again. Red has a bunch of abilities to lay the smackdown at enemies in real time, but make no mistake about it, you're going to be spending most of your time dealing with enemies in this planning mode since Red is way too fragile in the fray of things. The real-time combat is incredibly stiff, with slow movement and abilities not flowing into each other like other action games. Not to mention, there's like no defensive options that Red has in her arsenal. You can't block, you can't evade, shit, you can't even heal until late game. The best you have is this Jawn ability, which looks like a great evade tool, but the noticeable delay after each use isn't very helpful when the game introduces these fucking dogs and floating head enemies that are able to track you. Most fights you're going to be running from cover to cover, desperately waiting for the planning mode to cool down so you can actually do shit. Kind of makes you wonder why they even bother making this game real time. The advantage of freezing time and taking as long as you want to plan out your moves is too great. I'm pretty sure that you're supposed to think strategically too, considering all the different combinations of moves that you can go into battle with. So all of Red's powers, which are called functions, can either be used straight up, equipped onto another ability for a passive effect, or equipped onto an upgrade slot for an alternate effect. They obviously want you to experiment with different combinations, since when you die, you don't actually die, but instead have one of your functions taken away until you reach a checkpoint. I can see what they were trying to do here, and while I like the variety of options presented, I can't really say I found most of these functions very practical. Maybe I was doing something wrong, but I only found 4 functions to be reliable in this game. As useless as jaunt can be at times, it's still your only way to get around quickly, so that's a must equip. Crash makes subsequent attacks a lot more powerful, which is necessary to use later on when enemies become damage sponges. Breach is the only attack that does a good amount of damage, and tap is healing, so both of these have to stay in the rotation. Everything else was frankly whatever. I get experimenting with different abilities, but what's the point if they either suck or aren't that fun to use? Honestly, I didn't really feel any sense of progression in this game either. Much of the game looks the same, which adds to it, but leveling up always felt hollow since there's no noticeable difference in Red's strength early to late game. Also, this is kind of a side tangent, but are you supposed to play this game with a mouse and keyboard or a controller? I tried both out, and moving around generally feels better on a controller, but there's some precise attack lineups that I swear can only be done with a mouse. As you can probably tell, the combat in this game never quite clicked for me. I get trying to innovate, but man, all of these different mechanics just never came together smoothly. It's like they were trying to create an adventure game, and halfway through development they were like, oh fuck, we need some combat. Everything was all cool early on when enemies died in 2 hits. It becomes quite the slog later on when you fight a gang of these assholes that take 7 hits to knock down. The lack of defense and mobility I mentioned early on also contributes to that feeling. I would have rather this just been a straight up turn-based game since the customization is so good. Being so passive when it's not your turn really isn't fun. Also, can anyone tell me what was the deal with this beach area? You come here for challenge missions, but there's practically nothing to show for it. Oh, whoop-de-doo, you get a fucking song that you can only listen to in this specific area. You don't even get much in terms of XP considering how long some of these are. I swear a third of my game time was dedicated just to this area alone. I wish someone would have told me that I didn't have to do these because I was more than ready to go back to the main game after each trial. You know, they may have missed with the combat, but I'll still tell you what's of top tier quality from Bastion, the goddamn soundtrack. Yeah, D-Corp killed it again. The music this time around is electronic post-rock that draws a lot from industrial and jazz. Lots of slow tempo, echoey guitar tones, wonky drums and synths, and ethereal sounding strings and pianos. Very slick, very relaxing, well textured, but also kind of unsettling, matching the mysterious vibe of Cloudbank. The tracks with Ashley Barrett singing are instant goosebumps, let me tell you. If you dig bands like Radiohead, Massive Attack, or even Sigur Rós, then you'll dig the music. I definitely did, which is why it's all the more irritating when they decide to filter it out whenever you go into the planning mode.
Dug in their heels this time.
All the tracks get replaced with Red's humming, which, don't get me wrong, she can hum her ass off, but I would have rather just listened to the amazing soundtrack instead. Seems like a small gripe until you play the game yourself and realize that you're in the planning mode every minute. So as Red makes her way through the Goldwalk district, she encounters one of her former friends and one of the Camaradas, Sybil, who's been transformed into one of the process. Red kicks her ass and it's revealed that Sybil actually had the hots for Red and that she was the one that arranged the attack on the dead man who's now the Transistor. By absorbing her consciousness, it gives Red the location of the other Camarada members, 2 being the Kendrils who reside in the high-rise district. Through messages, they seem to be pretty apologetic for the whole ordeal, as it's also revealed that the process is no longer under their control. After fighting some gigantic process called the Spine, who makes the Transistor drunk for some reason, Red finds that both of the Kendrils have committed suicide. This leaves the last member, Royce Brackett, who's apparently fucked off to the heavily processed district of Fairview. Red fights her way over there, with Royce informing her that the only way to save the city is to plug the Transistor into something called the Cradle, which controls the process. She does this, and it did the job. However, both Red and Royce have been sucked into the Transistor's virtual realm, with only one of them being able to go back to the real world. So the final battle is a Transistor versus Transistor duel, and yeah, it's one of the highlights of the game. Always enjoy boss battles when the boss can do everything that the player can do. Definitely catches you off guard when this Sam Harris motherfucker freezes time and uses your own stuff against you. Anyway, after kicking his ass and leaving him screwed forever, Red restores Cloudbank back to normal and comes across the body of the Transistor, who at this point we know is Red's lover. Red sits beside the body and impales herself with the Transistor, killing herself.
Red! Red. No, Red. Did you do?
However, it's not that grim since it's shown that Red and her lover are now reunited in the Transistor's virtual world. So once I mostly knew what was going on in this game, I did start to enjoy the narrative, but you see, that's only when I knew what was going on, which only happened after I read more into the game's lore after it was over. In game, it's pretty hard to follow what the hell is going on. The actual story is pretty straightforward, but the way that the game tells it to the player is unnecessarily cryptic. This is one of those games that really wants you to read all the logs of the different characters and events. Far from my preferred way in digesting a game story, but whatever. I read most of them to try to get a better understanding, only to realize that most of these logs don't tell you shit and a lot of information is being withheld for some reason. I guess to keep this allure of mystery. It works in the beginning, but it becomes quite annoying later on when you're facing off against some of the Camerata without any emotional buildup. Once again, Logan Cunningham plays the narrator, this time as the Transistor. Just like the narrator in Bastion, he comments on almost everything that the player does, and a lot of the emotional moments is the relationship between him and Red. It's once again a good performance by the guy, as you can really feel the feelings of mutual love between the two characters. But man, unlike the narrator in Bastion, there's a lot of moments where I do wish that he would shut the fuck up, especially during these weird sequences where he would get all drunk.
Hey, wanna hear a funny joke? What's the difference? Never mind. Tell you later.
The voice acting is good, but I do wish that he was given better dialogue. A lot of what he says are just a series of meaningless cliches.
Left ourselves open for a seat from the flatbread.
So yeah, that's Transistor. Don't like this one as much as Bastion, and I'm kind of unsure if I even like it on its own. There's just too many things about this game that rub me the wrong way. This is one of those games where I think I like it more as art than as an actual game, because everything involving the presentation is good, but the moment-to-moment gameplay is really whatever. It's not bad, but I can't see myself coming back to this game. Anyway, that's all I gotta say about this one. Pyre is up next on the list, so until next time.